Good afternoon, everybody. It's a delight to be back here in Ayr at this campus that I remember so well from childhood. And I suppose my answer is from childhood. I was given an instrument when I was 9 years old, and like most kids in Scotland in those days, it was a recorder. And I knew within days that I wanted to write music in some way. I didn't know what that meant back then. I didn't have any notation or anything. But it was quite clear that something had begun, something had been sparked, I suppose. And in the journey towards other instruments and so on, there was always this desire to write music that went with it.
So tell us a bit about those very early experiences of you as a sort of 9 to sort of 15-year-old and your kind of musical education, what that consisted of, I mean, both in school and out of school.
Well, there was the valid experiences both in and out of school. I suppose that the school side, there was always a need for a musician in the class, a group of musicians that could be relied upon by teachers to collaborate on various things. And if someone knew what they were doing, maybe being able to accompany a hymn for a morning class or something, then that was important for the teacher and I think for the class. Because it was a little Catholic school, we were all involved in preparation for liturgies a lot of the time, both at the school and in the church. So that already had pegged into the idea that music and ritual, music and spirituality was somehow linked, and to be able to be involved in a very practical way right from the beginning was great, and I enjoyed that very much. I've been finding a lot of my old music that has been basically in drawers for decades, and I quite liked a lot of it, and I gave this mass, I mean I was very young when I wrote it, I gave it to Boosey and Hawkes and they published it, and Capella Nova have recorded it, and I'm actually very pleased with it. It sounds like the kind of composers we've just been talking about, Benjamin Britten and Kenneth Layton. I can hear that influence. It's like reading old letters that you wrote when you were 17, I suppose.
So what should we play from the, I don't know, the 80s? What do you want to play, the Triest piece?
Yes, or? Well, the earliest piece I have on disc is a piece I wrote for the Scottish Chamber Orchestra called Triest. This is a continual debate about how do we pronounce that word. Is it Triest or is it Trist? I've just established a new festival in Cumnock called the Cumnock Triest, and already people are arguing about how to pronounce it. Is it the Cumnock Tryst or the Cumnock Triest? I've always known it as a Triest, so that's a kind of meeting, a meeting of lovers, a secret assignation sometimes. And in this piece, Triest, there is a kind of musical meeting of influences. And I can look back again, it's like reading my old letters, and I can see what was in my mind at the time, what my musical enthusiasms were. I was discovering the rhythmic excitement of Stravinsky, the tendency that composers like Shostakovich had to try to not just tell a story in music, but also to keep a narrative alive, to keep a tradition alive. This is something that is very much a continual debate amongst composers. How much is tradition important to us, and how much should we be experimenting? I think it's not an either-or situation, but I'm intrigued by those composers in the 20th century that have maintained their love of tradition, imagining a music that was very much of our time, but you can still hear the influence of the great symphonists like Mahler and Brahms, even Beethoven, as a kind of spectral ghost in the background of the music. So this was a piece then that presents tradition, the old and the new coming together and trying to fuse.
And so tell us a bit about why it is now that you are wanting to do this pretty large thing in and for Cumnock.
Well, I don't know if anyone else here is from Cumnock, but I grew up there and left in 1977. When I was a youngster, there was a lot of music going on in places like Cumnock. I'm sure you're aware. There was local amateur operatic groups doing Gilbert and Sullivan. There was a local Kyle Choral Union. I remember doing Judas Maccabeus with them, playing a very timid third trumpet part in New Cumnock. There was a marvellous music club run by R.D. Hunter, and we used to get the Berlin Octet and some of the greatest musicians in Europe coming to Cumnock. It was because of those interactions with fellow amateur musicians and young musicians and teachers, as well as being exposed to great musicians coming to Cumnock, that I think I'm a musician. And I went away, and things have happened in Cumnock. What is it Fiona Lee said recently? It's not that it's troubles to seek. I mean, there's been a lot of quite devastating things have happened to the communities like Cumnock over the years, and I still have relatives there, and I still am back and forth quite a lot, but something has happened in the last few years which has made a few alignments come together. People are talking about regeneration in a political and economic sense. When Prince Charles and his consortium bought that marvellous Adams mansion at Dumfries House and linked it to local regeneration, it kind of caused a few lights to go off in people's heads. There are signs of little embers being blown back into life, and that's politics and economics and business, of course. I'm about something else, but I always imagined that real regeneration needed to be a spiritual thing as well, spiritual regeneration. And people do say that music is the most spiritual of the arts. It's not necessarily a religious thing to say that. People of very different worldviews know that music can have this huge impact, not just on the person, the individual, but on communities as well. It can bring communities together to make music. And I just thought the time is right for something like this to happen in Cumnock. So the Cumnock Trist will launch next year. It's a little festival, a little compact festival of great music, and there will be great musicians. One of the greatest choirs in the world will sing there in the first night. One of the great orchestras will play. Nicola Benedetti is our patron. She will perform twice at various venues throughout the town and in Dumfries House. It could be a marvellous, exciting thing for Cumnock, and my hope is that it will grow and grow as the years go on.